We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity for the white male over 50. Now, Voices of Integrity, it seems like it's pretty straightforward, but it might not be for some people. Like Voices of Integrity means we might say things that might offend you, especially if you're not a white male over 50. Now, with that being said, I have a tendency to probably be more critical on the white male over 50 than I am on everybody else. So you might be offended no matter what age or gender or ethnic or what background. Or, like, I'm just saying, you've been forewarned. You might be offended. Jim Bontrager, who Patrick and I both know, he said, God offends the mind to reveal the heart. I didn't realize I was such a great blessing from God years ago. So where this podcast goes, round and round, where it goes, we don't know where it's going to stop. We don't even know what topic it's going to be. I thought about this though, and there's a series of books that are going to be written, from my understanding, and there's a series of them, and one of them in the title is going to be, I'm a woman. Why do women hate me? Another is going to be, I'm a Christian. Why do Christians hate me? Another is going to be, I'm a black man. Why do black men hate me? I'm a Latino woman. Why do Latino women hate me? Now, those, and if you're tracking this, you go, oh, I know all the answers to that. I know why, you know, it, but the last book in this series is going to be, I'm a white male over 50. Everybody hates me. Why don't I care? Like, and Patrick and I are both white males over 50, and we could explain that to you in detail. So this isn't just, we're all inclusive. We don't care what your age or gender or sex is. We don't care about any of that. You can join us if you want to, and if you don't, that's fine too. We're not really looking to get, millions of people on here. We're definitely not looking to get likes. And so I think probably, Patrick, my experience is that nobody is really interested in the white male over 50. So I've been blessed to be an international speaker and author, traveled all around the world, written 16 books. My 17th book is in process now. It's titled Clean Windows, Learning to See Things We Can't See. So I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures in a lot of different areas all over the world. And people aren't really interested in studying the white male over 50. I get it. It's okay. What's weird is it seems like most white males over 50 don't want to be studied and don't think it's that big of a deal. So it's an interesting group of people. Why might you want to go ahead and study the white male over 50? So I've been married for 40 years. My wife and I have 7 children, 10 grandchildren. And so if you have a dad or a grandfather that's a white male over 50, you might want to hang out in this podcast, because there might be some things that you'll learn that say, he doesn't think like that. He might not, or he might think like Patrick and I might talk, but he might not just say it to you. He might be thinking it, but not saying it to you. If you're a woman, it'd be good to do that. If you're in business, it'd be good to do that. See, the white male over 50, personally, I don't think they're any more or less special than anybody else on this planet. Just don't. Which is unique, right? Because it seems like to me, Patrick, everybody thinks they're special. But, you know, and
Right. I totally agree. It's kind of one of those things that I think from birth on up to a certain point, we have a lot of people telling us how special we really are. Our mothers, sometimes our fathers, sometimes our wives at the beginning. And I found it pretty interesting that at a certain point, I realized that number one, uh, that wasn't necessarily the case for the first part place, and secondly, I learned to almost not care that whether somebody thinks I'm special or not. Isn't that kind of, you kind of almost mature into that? So
see, it's
why?
interesting. it's interesting on how your background's different because my mom and dad, like they had one of their rules was not to give their kids praise. Like, that was one of their rules. My mom said it. My mom went ahead and said, I think so. I have five siblings. And she said, I think dad's goal was to raise you guys independent. Now, I don't know if that was it or he just didn't like having relationships. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. But we were very independent. And so we weren't in need of them. But my parents almost never gave us any praise. And I think that's good. I don't think that's bad. I don't think that, I have a bad parents. I don't think that I've been abused or something because my parents didn't praise me. I think that often if we praise our children too much or our grandchildren or people around us, it gets to be where it's like an addiction. Like any good thing that's done has to be praised. Well, if that's you, if you think you need to be praised for every good thing you've done, I'm just telling you, just between you and I, you're not doing enough good things.
Well, I like a certain metaphor. You know, when you try to buy a car, and we've all kind of done that. I mean, both of us have been through that many, many times. When was the last time you had somebody say to you, this car actually runs, the engine actually works, and and so if you equate that to the way people are when you, for example, go to work or when you're being your husband, why would you articulate something, you know, that's supposed to be built into the value in the first place? Do you see what I'm saying? It's the same thing. Praise is kind of like that.
Right? Like, this is what's amazing to me, where again, not criticizing young men, young married men. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying, um, there's so much that you should be doing that you get no praise for at all. Like if you need praise, like I remember when my three sons approached me, one of them was in their 20s, the other in their teens, and like, Dad, take a look at this. This is a man card. I just started laughing. I'm like, I don't even have to look at it. I'm just saying, if you have to have a card that says you're a man, you're not a man. Like
Yeah,
you're
that's true.
like you're just not. Um, so we're going to have a number of different topics on this, Patrick. You and I, like, we're going to have a whole section for married, being married and our wives. And oh my
Okay.
gracious, our wives are probably going to be just so enraptured by what we share that they're going to want to be on with us. And I'll invite my wife on and she can go ahead and roll her eyes and and so we'll have things on our children, or we'll have things professionally, or we might talk about our thoughts on money or government or spiritual, or who knows what the topics are. um, One of the rules is that in this podcast is, we can say anything we want, and if it hurts your feelings, I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, I don't want to say I don't care. I mean, that wouldn't be rude. Um, and so Patrick, what would you like to kick it off here today? What topic area would you like to talk about?
Well, I, I've thought about that, and every day seems to be its own challenge, isn't it? So I think that maybe what we'll talk about today are boundaries, okay? Because that I think that's a great topic. Uh, I like the idea of setting up boundaries, but I think it's a good conversation to talk about what a boundary is, what is not, and who
Why do you
benefits
think
from them.
boundaries are good?
I think they are good if, they're true boundaries. The idea that anything you want is a boundary is misplaced. I think a boundary is kind of like, I don't know if you ever watched Leghorn, Foghorn cartoons when we were
Um,
younger,
yeah.
and he used to draw the line, and then he would tell people, "Do not step over that line." Well, that to me is what a boundary is. Don't step over that line. That
So
that line is
this is one piece of advice for parents. Okay, I'm just telling you. Your kids have phenomenal stamina, especially little ones. And so before you tell them to do anything, you always have to go ahead and think, do I have the energy to enforce what I just said? Because I'm telling you, my wife had 7 kids. You don't enforce a boundary one time. I mean, one time their whole life, they'll remember it somehow. I don't know how, and they won't trust you. So it's weird to me. And I just, when I'm out and the kids aren't obeying the parents, and it's the parents threaten them and then they don't follow through. And I'm not a real big fan of counting to 5 either. Like my kids, it was pretty simple. This is not complicated. And I tried to tell my wife this too. She had a harder time understanding it. It's like, kids, this is not a democracy. This is a benevolent dictatorship. It's, you know, and dad tells you to do something, you do it right now, and you do it with a great attitude. It's simple. This is not complicated. Do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, how I tell you to do it with a great attitude. Very simple. And that was really reinforced, at very, very young ages. And so,
so here's something that we can actually have some fun with. How many times has the dad come home and guess what the mom is doing? She's counting, right? Do this, and then she's counting. And she always says 1, 2, 3. And I'm sitting back watching and saying, okay, what was the number? The magic number was 3. And then she says 4, and the kid's still looking at her, right? How many times do we? I don't know. I saw that playing up. I have 6 children, my wife and I do, and they all went past 3. So, I don't want to interfere with my wife. So I
right.
would come in there. I can tell you what I would do. I would sit there and say, "So you guys are doing the counting thing, right?" And they'd say, and everybody shakes their head, yes. And I said, when I count, if I get past my count, then there's going to be probably some pain involved of some sort because I'll make sure of that, right? That's what I
Right.
don't know. That's what dads always did when that's just what you do. So you know what I do with my kids? I would sit there and say, okay, so I'll count to 3. If I get to 3, you're going to feel the pain. And you know what I would do? I would say 1, 3, and then they'd be shocked at me, and then I would inflict the pain in whatever form I decided. So then I would sit down and I'd look at them, and they would, and I'd say, "Don't tell me about the rules. I make the rules." And so the next time I hear your mom counting to 3, I want you to think about it. And you know what? I think that kind of cured everybody of the counting.
See, and this is what's interesting because every one of my 3 boys hit my wife once when they're like, I don't know, 1 or 2. like
Yeah.
they all did. And I'd see it happen once and they'd never have it happen again. I mean, it would just be instilled in their little tiny boy brains. You never hit your mother, you never hit a woman. You just don't. And so some of the stories on here, like I'm thinking, so if I ever start getting into a story and you think I might be legally at risk, you can stop me. Like, or maybe what I'll do is I'll just say I have a friend. Like,
Okay.
so, um, so it was interesting because Jonathan, our oldest son, so he has 4 sisters, 2 brothers, but his brothers didn't come until way later. They're 10 years younger. So we homeschooled our kids, and Jonathan had, so he had 4 sisters, a mom. His piano teacher was a woman. Like he had a lot of women in his life, and he was probably, I think, 9, maybe 12, something like that. And he just had issues with women. I mean, his mom and everybody else, and it's interesting. And so So one day I come home and we'd been working on it. I come home and Rosanna's like, you got to do something with this boy. So I go into his room. I say, hey, Jonathan, bud. It's like, he looks down. He knows he's O's. He looks down and he's like, yeah, Dad. I'm like, it's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, buddy, I need to explain something to you how this whole thing works. Okay. And he's like, okay. And I said, you need to obey and honor your mom because God says that's important to do. So this is important. And God says it. This is like really important. And I explained that to him and he's like, okay, I get it. And he said, and then I said, now if that's not enough motivation, and it should be, but if that's not enough motivation, um, you should do it because you and I are buddies. Like when I come home from work and you want to wrestle, I'm fine with it. We're going to wrestle. We're going to have fun. We're going to have a great time. You don't understand this now, but when you make your mom's life hard, it makes my life. You're going to understand that someday in the future. But right now, you don't. So you need to obey and honor her because, we're friends and buddies. It's just a good thing to do. Do you understand that? He's like, I do. I'm like, okay, good. Now, if that's not enough motivation, it should be. But if it's not, then I just looked him square in the eyes, like 12-year-old boy to dad. And I just looked square in his eye and said, and if that's not enough motivation, then you need to go ahead and do it because I will go ahead and absolutely crush you if you don't. I mean, just man to man and just, I mean, iron on iron. And he looks at me and he's just big eyes and it's like, because she's my wife. So you need to honor her because she's my wife, and great harm will come to you. And he's like, got it, Dad. And then I went and I explained to him, now which of these three things do I want you to do it for? Number one, yeah, Dad. Number two, I don't want to do number three, but I'm willing to do that as a husband. Do you get it? So he was in his 20s, and I shared that story to a couple of very top level women, and they're like, Mark, that's abusive. That was abusive. That was mentally abusive. And I'm like, really? And they're like, oh yeah, no, that damaged him. I'm like, I don't think so. I think he understood. They're like, nope, that was abusive. So I go back to him, and he's in his mid 20s. I say, hey, do you remember that conversation we had? He's like, oh yeah. I said, did that create any trauma or issues? Oh no, Dad, I got it. That was just you being a man, like you making sure that you're caring for your wife and you're not going to allow your kids, your boys especially, to bring harm to her physical, emotional, relational. So, no, Dad, I got it. That was totally good. And so I don't know.
I
And to
guess,
that, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I had the same experience with my kids. Now, I mean, I had six, and five of them were boys, and it was very interesting for me because we had the same issues. Only, like I don't know, my wife was kind of a big softie. I mean, she just was that person who was just really, lovey dovey, and that was really important to her. And she was a great mother in that way, nurturing all that. Well, she knew that I was a bit of a, hard guy when it came down to it because I just like, we're guys and we don't have to be all that soft. Remember, in a home with five boys, it's like we don't have to be that way, and it's important that you learn some of those lessons. But what happened was that my kids would watch and observe, and they knew they would try to triangulate. You know what that means?
Right.
They would like to watch, and they'd like to insert, and they'd do the old big doe eyes, and they would, they'd kind of want to go and cry to the mother about how kind of mean dad was in a particular case or whatever. But I kind of went right around that because and my kids did kind of learn that. I looked at them and I said, I will never interfere between you and your mother and their relationship. Don't want to do it. We'll never do that. But here's the thing, and it was very similar to the way you said it. The way I said it was, hey, it your mother is my wife. Now, if you misuse her, I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you I'm going to take that kind of personal because she's my wife. You're disrespecting me. And guess what? She's not. This isn't about you and her. It's about you and me. And I told him, and that can get kind of rough because I think sometimes you boys understand, basic pain a lot better than, like I would do with my daughter. So
Right.
they got that so well, and they actually understood. They kind of went along. So I would sit there, and if my wife came to me and she would say something, I mean, if she told me something that was particularly offended my sensibilities about how somebody was treating my wife, the boys knew that there would be, serious ramifications for that, because it was between me and them then. It was no longer about between them. So I don't know if you found that out, but I knew that I found that and then if my wife came back, how many times did your wife, well, do you think you're being a little, I said, you know what? I will not interfere between you and your sons or children, but neither are you going to interfere with my relationship with the boys. They need to know who their dad is and why he's dad. And so, I was able to set some of those, what we would call, boundaries, maybe. I would just say, hey, that's how we're going to do this. And I don't know how you found it. And my wife, it took a little bit for her to get used to that. But
Yeah,
I
I
just
don't
found
know
that
if
it was,
mine still is used to it after 40 years. Like she's trying to go ahead and be, but what do you do for you and I are both, so Patrick is a driver amiable or driver analytic. No, sorry. Yeah, he's a driver analytic, expressive, amiable personality in the geo test. And then in the pain quadrant, he's an analytic, amiable driver person. So pretty complex, but definitely strong analytic, strong driver, have some amiable at some point. What do you do with a woman who's got a husband that's maybe like our wives were? Like, I think, like, I think,
I do get that.
like,
But what I usually tell those people is, oh man, life's going to be painful for you. That's what yeah, yeah. I would just say, it's an important thing. If there's younger people watching this, what I'm going to say is, it's a little bit better if you endure the pain now and you know, set some standards so that you don't endure a whole lot of pain later. And I don't know, am I going to offend a woman by saying that it's a very strong need for men and women to understand certain expectations right from the beginning? It's kind of like that boundary line so that there's not the chaos and the uncertainty. It's the uncertainty that really causes a lot of problems. So if you're secure and stable and certain, say this is what we're going to allow, and these are things that we're just not going to do that. So does that make any sense to you at all?
it does. My dad was an amiable, analytic, amiable, but he was still someone you knew don't mess with him. Like he wasn't like me, just kind of hard, gruff, like just direct. He was softer, nicer, more laid back, but we still knew don't mess with mom, don't mess with dad. And my mom was a very strong woman. She was an analytic, amiable. Um, and so for ladies out there, I've heard from a lot of ladies, and they don't understand how, when your boys, especially when they get past the age of 8, 9, 10, I don't think moms understand how much they irritate boys.
You
So
mean men? Oh,
we'll have that for another one, another
right.
podcast. So moms, like my mom, I didn't find out until I was probably in my 40s or 50s. My mom said, and I have 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and my mom said that my dad went to her and said, "Honey, you need to leave the boys alone and let them be boys, let them be men." And she did. And I think that was very hard for her to do, but she honored and respected my dad, and she did that. And I think that it was hard for her, but there's tremendous respect. I love and adore my mom for what she was and what she did and all of those type of things. So there's probably somewhere on here that you can go ahead and submit a question or connect in. There's places where you can participate live and interact with, Patrick and I, ask questions, dialogue. And again, We don't care what your age is. You have questions about the white male over 50, you know, you come on, you ask the questions. Just be ready for the answer because we're like, you can check with our wives because our wives, even, we're pretty honest with our wives. Like when our wives ask us a question, it's like, why are you asking that question? Well, I want to, do you really want to know? Because I'm fine telling you. So if we're going to be this honest with our wives, trust us, we're going to be equally as honest with you. We don't care. Like you ask us, our perspective. If you want us to give you insight into women, I'm fine with doing that. Like some people call me the woman whisperer. Like I have, a wife and four daughters. And I've had all five of them gang up on me at once. And that's what a blessing that is. I mean, that's just really cool. Like to see them all come at me. So if you have any questions, connect with the individual who invited you to participate in today's session, or you can call toll free 888-230-2300 outside the US 630-393-9909. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.